Hi, welcome to the garden. I wanted to show you guys some of my absolute favorite garden hacks today. I've got a list of about 15 things that make gardening so easy, and these are items that I don't think that I see really anybody else using or talking about, and I've tried to scour to make sure that these are all super unique garden hacks, and these are ones that I pretty much implement daily here in our garden. So my name is Robbie. I garden in Northern California, Zone 9A, where temperatures sometimes can get about 110 to 115 during the summer, and we might hit 32 degrees during the winter. So we have a very mild climate in the winter and a very extreme climate in the summer. Summer's kind of our off season for gardening. So let's get into these garden hacks that I've pulled. So one of my favorite things to do is when I first bring home a plant, I like to make sure that it is well fed, well fertilized before it gets in my garden. So I take one of these 10-20 trays, and you can really use any tray, and I like to take my water-soluble fertilizer. This one is by Proven Winners. We also use the one by Miracle-Gro. I just buy whatever one is on sale, whichever one's most affordable. You take a little scoop of this stuff right here, comes with a little scoop, and I like to take just like a light feeding, so I'll do half a scoop, dump it in the tray, fill the tray up with water, and then I like to soak my plants when I bring them home from the nursery. I don't know the last time they got fed, especially if it's an annual, and then these will sit in this tray overnight, let them absorb all the water they can, and then I go ahead and I go plant them in the garden. So this is my little hack. So everything before it gets planted in the garden gets a really good feeding. So maybe like half a tablespoon of water-soluble fertilizer in a tray filled with water. Let your plants soak, absorb as much water up as they can. That way they are nice and wet before they get planted in the garden, and they are well fed before they get put in the garden. Now the next thing that I like to do is I use wire baskets like crazy around here. We deal with underground critters that eat the roots of our plants. So these wire baskets have been very helpful this year. This is my first year doing this. So I saw online that there were companies that were selling almost similar wire baskets to these, and they were very, very expensive. I picked these up from the Dollar Tree. So I like to use these ones right here. They're square or kind of round, and these ones are for bulbs. So in the fall, if I have to plant tulip bulbs, these are the ones that I like to use because they're nice and shallow, very easy, and tulip bulbs don't need much room for roots. These are the ones that I like to use for annuals and small growing perennials. I don't really put anything else in these. Anything that has an extensive root system doesn't go in these, but the roots can grow through these. The animals can't come in and eat anything, but these ones are nice. They're very sturdy. These ones are about $1.25 from the Dollar Tree. They do come in black and white. I've found that the black ones disappear in the garden. The white ones kind of stand out. And say you deal with above ground critters like squirrels or deer or rabbit getting to your plants and eating them, you can also go in with one of these wire cloches like this. This is a much taller one. These ones are kind of expensive, or you can just take one of these wire baskets, place it over the top, and then use landscape staples to staple it down around 3 sides. So you have essentially the same effect. This one is just a little bit taller, but this one is also quite a bit pricier. But wire baskets like these help tremendously when dealing with pests eating my plants. I have a ton of plants that are in holding that need to get planted still, but I don't like to come out here and water my plants. I'm not big on hand watering. It's not something that I find relaxing, so we found a solution to that. So whether I have maybe 10 or 15 plants of annuals, or if I have a whole back garden full of shrubs and perennials, I like to use these overhead sprinklers. So these are fabulous. So if you look at this, it attaches to a hose on this side, and should you need to connect a whole bunch of them, you can unscrew this piece right here and you can attach another hose to it. We used to do this, so water comes straight through that hole right there. And so you can have kind of an infinite line of overhead sprinklers, and it's got all these different settings, kind of like a nozzle sprayer. And so you just kind of come through and adjust it, and it gives you different spray modes through your entire garden. So if we come down here, I can show you how this one is attached. So we have this sprinkler that just stays directly in the ground with this little spike, and then we have a hose attached to the base here, kind of spirals around, and it goes off to a timer. Let me show you guys the timer. So that hose then comes over to this timer that we have attached to the hose spigot right here. And then the timer is set to just go off about twice a day. It goes off first thing in the morning and then in the evening time for just a couple of minutes. And that makes sure all of my plants that are in holding can stay well watered. I don't have to rely on anything. Of course, we come out here and we check and make sure that everybody did actually get water. But if you have a horde of plants like most gardeners do, I feel like, then this is a really good way to make sure everything stays well watered. It's also great if you're going out on like a vacation away for a weekend and you know that you can't really trust somebody to water, grab one of these sprinklers, a hose, and a timer, and everybody should be taken care of. So the next thing that I like to do is I have a pot full of old broken pots, and I like to use them to block the drainage hole slightly in any type of pot that I'm going to be using for planting. So the drainage hole is great in containers because it helps let moisture out, but it also tends to let a bunch of soil out. So I like to come through and I like to find a piece of old broken pot. I stick it down here at the very bottom. It still allows plenty of drainage, but it's going to make it so that soil can't just seep through the bottom of my container. And it's a great way to use old broken pots because I know we all have multiple lying around. I have another one lying in the side yard. Next is making sure that all of my plants have labels on them. I like things to be well labeled. It has not always been the case, but this year I'm really enjoying everything having a label on it. So I personally like to go in with a label maker and I make really pretty labels this year. And this has made it so that way I've actually enjoyed getting labels on all of my plants. So what I like to do, I like to use these copper tags. I pick them up in bulk and they're fabulous. They're really pretty, they're subtle, and they're just like a nice little accent piece. Then what I do is I go through with a garden time marker and I write the name of the plant on the back of the tag. So that way the plant is well labeled. The garden time marker, these are UV resistant, so they can be outside for many, many years without any fading on your plant tags versus using a Sharpie and things like that. Sharpie is going to fade for you within that first year. And then using my label maker, I like to go in and I like to make a really pretty plant tag. That way it's really pretty and legible on one side. And then just in case that plant tag fails, I've got a fail safe on the back. So that way this plant tag is going to be perfectly legible in my garden for many, many years to come. I do this for annuals, perennials, shrubs. I don't do this one for trees, but you definitely could. So the next thing that we like to do is a trash can. We like to store our hoses in a trash can. Hoses are not cheap. They are kind of an expensive garden item and one that I don't like to have to buy over and over again. So in the winter months, or if we're just not using it to protect our hose, we coil them up, we shove them in one of these Rubbermaid trash cans, and it works fabulously. That way rodents aren't getting to it, nobody's chewing holes in it. I don't drop equipment on it and puncture a hole in my hose. We like to buy the contractor grade hoses, and those can be $100 easily for a short hose. So this just makes it so that way our hose is nice and protected. It doesn't get any weird kinks in it. It doesn't get any rodents chewing on it. I don't accidentally destroy it. And this just stores really easily. We can usually fit a couple hoses in here if we coil them up really nicely. The next thing is to top your containers with something. I have 3 different things that I really like to use. I like to use moss. I think it's a really, really pretty option to top a container. This here is preserved moss. You can actually go ahead and buy this in bags or you can buy it in bulk. I like to buy it in bulk because it is actually a little bit cheaper, even though it is kind of expensive, but it just comes in these big, huge sheets, and then I can just kind of tear it up and I can shove it into a container however I need to. And then I also like to use pine cones. I think pine cones are really pretty. So I just go out, collect little pine cones, and I use them as a soil topper right here. Soil toppers are gonna help with moisture retention and help it so that way weeds don't just pop up in my containers. The other one that I like to use, and I don't use this for everything, is I like to use a little bit of gravel. Anything that's a little bit more heat tolerant, I like to use this for things like succulents, any type of cactus or anything like that. I go through with a scoop of this and I just sprinkle it across the top. It helps with a little bit of moisture retention in containers, helps with those weeds, and it just looks a lot prettier than bare soil. Now this is probably the only one that I don't actually do for my garden, but it is one that was left on the last video that I made about garden hacks, and a lot of you said that it was a genius idea. So that is to store your gloves in a Ziploc baggie. A lot of you guys deal with crazy spiders. We don't really get spiders too much over here. We get orb weavers and then we get the occasional black widow. But for us, black widows, they're more afraid of you than you are of them. They run the second that you even touch their web. So one of you had said to store your gloves in a Ziploc baggie when they're not in use, so that way a spider doesn't accidentally crawl inside of your gloves. It's not something that I am terribly afraid of, but if you are somebody who does not like spiders, who is afraid of sticking your hands in a glove with spiders, when you're not in use, go ahead and just put them in a Ziploc baggie and keep them in your garden cart, and that way they will always be spider-free. Now we all have broken pots, like I've talked about. We all have multiple broken pots if you're anything like me. So if I have a really big piece like this, where it is still probably about half the pot or more than half the pot, we turn these into little toad houses. We also like to sometimes raise containers up and stick them in a really cool dark location. So that way toads can go underneath them. I've got a basket planter that always has toads living underneath it because it's raised up just enough for them. But we like to take these, stick them here underneath a plant in kind of a damp and cool location like this. Make it so there's just a small opening for these guys to get in. Cover it back up with the plants. You do want to make sure that it is cool and damp for these guys, and this will eventually become a really good toad house. We should have toads in here in no time. The next thing that I like to do is if I'm going to be doing any planting during the summertime, my plants need to acclimate. I usually keep them in the shade when they're in their nursery containers. So we bulk bought a whole bunch of umbrellas, and these work so fabulously because they still let in a lot of light because they are white. They're a little translucent so you can see through them. So if I plant anything and it's a day where, like I said, we can hit 110 degrees here during the summer very easily. We hit that every single year. I will come out and I like to just place these over freshly planted plants. So pop it into the ground. You can see this one is well loved. We have a whole bunch that are brand new, and these just work great to help these guys acclimate for a couple days in the garden. So I might look like a crazy person, but anything that's tender or anything that is freshly planted during the summertime gets a little umbrella, so that way it doesn't crisp up and burn. Okay, the next one, we're gonna have to get a little close and personal, but it's plant supports. Plant supports can be really expensive, so we DIY them. Let me show you a metal one that we have. This one right here, it's actually a peony cage, and so it's metal. It's got this ball on it. You will buy it one time, and you'll probably have it a lifetime. So that is fabulous, but I do think it was like 20 something dollars. I think it was like 25 bucks for this one plant support, which is very expensive. So I've decided to start DIYing them. I go in, I find a very straight stick. This is actually from Tree of Heaven, which can be quite invasive. I drill a hole in the top, a hole in the bottom, and then I find a flexible branch. We use willow tree, you can use birch trees, you can use anything that has a super flexible branch that you can kind of turn into a circle. You could also use grapevine if you want. Stick one end into one hole and then the other end into the second hole, and then you have a perfectly round plant support that works beautifully for staking up your plants. I have, I think, 7 of these working for plants that needed support this year. The next one is one that you can't see at this moment, but it is landscape fabric. I personally think that landscape fabric has a time and a place in the garden, and it is not for every single garden. I use landscape fabric anywhere that we have a walkway. What that's going to do is it's going to suppress current weeds that are there. So landscape fabric for me only gets used in walkway areas and areas that I plan on never doing any planting. You don't want to use it inside your flower beds. What it's going to do is it's going to suppress current weeds, but new weeds, it's not going to stop them. What's going to happen is you're going to put landscape fabric down, you're going to put some type of mulch down. That mulch is eventually going to break down. Seeds are going to land on top of that broken down mulch, germinate, and then bam, you have weeds again on top of your landscape fabric, defeating what you thought it might actually do. So we keep it in the pathways. I keep my pathways weed free. There's rarely any dirt that lands in our pathways because it is just gravel. So this has made it so that way our pathways are very low maintenance and hands off, and I don't deal with landscape fabric inside the bed. You really don't want to put any landscape fabric in the bed. Please, I am begging you, I promise it will just become a major headache. Next, every single year, I grab this terracotta pot and I keep every single one of my plant tags. I bring a new plant home after I'm done filming my video about it. The plant tag goes directly inside this pot to be saved for a later date. So that way I know at the end of the season which plants I liked, which plants I didn't like, which plants I plan on ordering more of, which plants died. Every single year, I then go through and I look at every single one of these plant tags to figure out who performed well, who didn't perform well, who's gonna make the cut for next year's garden. I then go through and I throw away the plant tags that I did not like. I keep the plant tags of plants that are still in the garden. And that is when I start making my list of plants that I'm going to be on the hunt for next year's garden. I then take all of these and I put them in another container that is labeled with the year. So I've got plant tags in an old nursery pot that say 2025, 2024, 2023, and I've got all of my plants so that way I know everything that is in my garden at all times. It's just a really great way to stay organized. And during the growing season, I don't have to be organized about it. I just throw it in a pot, don't even think about it, and then I come back at the end of the year. The next thing that I like to do is I like to keep my fertilizer in metal pails. I usually have 2 scattered around the garden, one at the front of the property, one at the back of the property, and I walk away from them. This one is currently empty because I've used the last of the fertilizer, but I like to keep it in a metal bucket. It just makes it so easy to actually be able to use the fertilizer. I also then have a little scoop. I've switched to this terracotta pot because it actually dispenses almost the perfect amount, so I almost fill this container up all the way. And that's what each plant gets, is a little tiny bit of the slow release fertilizer. Every single plant that goes in my garden, if I can find my bucket, gets slow release fertilizer. It's just gonna help feed all my plants. What I have also started doing is I've started using this kind of as like a garden caddy. So I do keep a little shovel in here. So that way if I've got a plant that it needs to be dug up or anything like that, I've got a little shovel. I've also started keeping a pair of snips in my fertilizer, and I just keep it face down in my fertilizer. That way I've got a little garden caddy that's got fertilizer, it's got a shovel, and I've got snips, kind of the overall everything that you need, kind of like in a quick little fix situation for some plants. The last thing, and if anything, please take this one garden hack, it is to wear sunscreen. I treat it as though it is going out of style. I am a sunscreen snob, okay? Here's my favorite sunscreens. I like this sunscreen if I just need a little something light, if I'm not really planning on going out into the garden much during the day. I like this one. It's an SPF 30. It goes on very easily. It says it's sheer. I would say if you probably have a darker complexion, this one might be one that leaves a little bit of a white cast. If I am going in the water, I use this one. This one is eco and water safe. It is also reef safe. So if you're going into the ocean, anywhere that there's a reef, this is the one that you need to use. It is an SPF 45. And then my day-to-day sunscreens. I really love this one by Tatcha. This is the one that I use on my face pretty much daily. It is a tinted mineral-based sunscreen. This is an SPF 50. It has a really nice feel to it. It doesn't feel oily. It doesn't feel awful on my skin. Some sunscreens a lot of people tend to avoid because of how it feels. This is a very expensive sunscreen, but I only use this one on my face because I don't like that feeling of sunscreen on my face, and it feels like you're not wearing anything. And last, these are sunscreen sticks. These are amazing. I have so many of them. This is a brand new one, and this is a used one. So I use this every single day on my hands and my arms, and this is one that I reapply. It is an SPF 50. It is a zinc-based sunscreen, so it does leave a white cast. I even notice a white cast on my pale, pasty white skin, but SPF 50, this is really great to just get on the hands and do a quick little reapplication. Make sure you're getting your hands, make sure you're getting your ears, make sure you're getting the back of your neck. Please, please, please wear sunscreen out in the garden. These are my favorite sunscreens. Like I said, I hoard sunscreen as though it is going out of style. I hope that you are also hoarding sunscreen. So those are my garden tips and tricks. I hope that you found this video extremely helpful. Maybe even found a new tip or trick for your garden. These are the ones that I use daily in mine. If you haven't had a chance to, I hope that you've hit that like and that subscribe button by now. Not sure why you haven't. Thank you so much for visiting our garden. We'll see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.